together as the time's here. Some people that are in different places, I believe. So we need one more for a quorum to actually have any votes, but we can go ahead and start some business. And I'll ask Senator Hodges if he would list the invocation today. Are you number, what's that going to be, 11? Okay, go ahead.
Would you pray with me, please? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for this state and nation in which we live. Thank you for all the many blessings you've bestowed upon us, especially the opportunity, Lord, to be here today to administer to the affairs of our state. Please lead us and guide us in all we do and provide wisdom. These things we ask in Christ's name, amen.
Well, I would think about having my vice chair run the meeting and me present this from down there, but since he's not here, I think I'll just go ahead and try it from up here. One of the reasons being that we dealt with this last year. We passed this identical bill out. The tax commissioners are the only entity that some of them, not all of them, but some of them don't have any retirement system at all. They do collect state taxes for Georgia. So what we had done last year was put in a 5% 401k for them, which is, you know, not as good as some retirement systems, but it at least gives them something going. And when we looked at the numbers of those that don't have it, it's just certain counties. It's more smaller counties, and the cost of it was about $225,000 last year. So we had passed this out. Now, in some conversations I've had, there's other parts of this that deal with the maximum the tax commissioner can make and things like that in there. And some conversations with the House, they requested that we keep this clean over here, that we only deal with the 401k. They got combined last year, got some sort of controversial, that we only deal with this part of the bill and that we let them send over one with the fees that the tax commissioners get separately. So I guess what I'm asking the committee to do is to allow our legislative counsel, Blake Travis, here adopt language that would strike those sections out. I know he's got to go up in there in the first part and probably take a couple of sentences out, but we'll strike those sections out and only deal with the 401k match of 5% for our tax commissioners. Again, they're the only group out there that have no retirement, and this would let them at least have a basic retirement. I know there's people here that can testify on it if need be, but we did pass this out last year, though I know there's a couple of people that, well, actually 3 that weren't here last year that went through this issue.
Makes sense to me, Mr. Chairman. You want that in the form of a motion?
Yeah, I've got, no questions, anybody? Okay, go ahead. Excuse me.
I just needed that one more time. What's the proposal?
Well, the part of the bill that deals with just the 401k match up to 5% for the tax commissioners who don't have any retirement system. And most of them do have a retirement system. Some of them are on the old retirement system. And that old retirement system, I believe, is costing us about $9 million a year that still exists. This would put them on a new 401k match that eventually others could be eligible for, but the total cost is about $225,000 to do that for those commissioners, mostly in rural counties that don't have any kind of a retirement system available to them.
Is it basically section 1?
Yeah, just section 1 and deleting the other parts at the request of the House that wanted to take the rest of it out.
Makes sense. Got it.
And so you had a motion, you said?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we strike all of section 2 and have it reordered, as well as update the caption. I'm assuming sections 3 and 4 will be sufficient to keep.
All right, and I didn't say this at the beginning, but this is Senate Bill 56, and we were operating off of LC number 432567.
Correct. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to amend my motion to strike sections 2 through 4, reorder and update the caption.
All right, we've got a motion. Is there a second? Second by Senator Hickman. Any discussion on this? Again, it will be the same thing we did pass out last year. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, any opposed? Did everybody raise their hand? Okay, so we've got a unanimous vote on that. I thank the committee. We did this last year. We'll move forward with this to the House and hopefully continue to work on this with them.
That was the amendment. You want to pass the bill?
Oh, yeah, we did just pass the amendment. He's correct.
Can I make a motion to do pass Senate Bill 56 as a committee substitute?
And we've got a motion as a second from Majority Leader Gooch. All in favor, raise your hand again. Okay, any opposed? Unanimous is passed. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got a one other bill to deal with today. This was, find this bill in here. It's kind of a bipartisan bill from two senators that both seem to be from the same geographic area, so there might be something about that involved. I don't know, but if Senator Jones, if you want to come up and present the bill to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of this distinguished body, this distinguished committee. I have an opportunity to present Senate Bill 80, and I believe that some of my best legislation that I've ever introduced in this chamber in the past 19 years has been inspired by citizens of our great state who come to me and say, we have a problem. And that's exactly what former mayor of Stockbridge, Lee Stewart, who sits with me today, retired military, 32 years, had an opportunity in his later life to enjoy the company of his wife, where he had remarried, and they quickly discovered that they had a problem because both of them lived in different states. And this bill seeks to amend the act here in the great state of Georgia that will provide, and it's narrowly tailored, by the way, and specifically on line 15, it's provided, however, that if a married couple lives apart in two different states, which each spouse owning and occupying their respective residence as a permanent place of residence for at least 10 years. So, and this is the case that happened with my good friend, former Mayor Lee Stewart, when he found out, and he was honest with the tax commissioner office in Henry County, that in fact, his spouse owned another home in a different state, of which they denied him all of his exemptions, homestead exemptions that he had in place. Over on line 31 through 32, again, would simply be the language where we're asking for a vote from the residents of this great state as to whether or not this homestead exemption should be adopted. And Mr. Chairman, if you will allow, I would like to have my good friend, the former mayor of Stockbridge, say a few words.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to come speak with y'all. I'm from Georgia. I was drafted from Georgia in '67. I did 32 years and 18 days. I was shot twice, grenaded once, accidentally bombed once, and missed by the largest suicide bomber in Iraq in one March of '04 when he killed 112, wounded 454. I'm here because of the prayers of my mother and my grandmother. And so when I decided to retire, I decided to retire right there in Stockbridge. I bought my home, and military service is rough on the families, and I'd been single for about 15 years. And the good Lord sent me another lady from Chicago, from Illinois. She's a retired school teacher. I'm retired military. We have almost identical families, 3 kids each, grandkids and everything. And we dated for a couple years and decided to get married. And that was no problem until we went to the tax office. And when I went in there to update my tags on my truck from a Purple Heart tag to 100%, is when the tag office told me that, well, you shouldn't be paying tags on your home as well, you know, on your truck. Well, I didn't know nothing about it. And so they told me to look into it, and I called talked to the commissioner, tax commissioner in Henry County, and he looks at it and goes, yeah, you shouldn't be being taxed for that, 100% disabled. And fast forward, the last thing, there's a form on I'm not sure if it's a state form or what, but when it says we're about to resolve it, do you have a property that you taxes in another state? Well, yes. My wife has it in Illinois. I have it here. We've had our own homes for 20 plus years, separate than that. But by being married, one of us has to give it up. And she's not, Illinois taxes are really high. So we let her keep hers, but then I lose mine. My kids have graduated from '93 and been gone. I have no kids now here in Georgia except myself. And now I'm back to not even on the exemption where you're over 70. I'm over 75. I'm back to paying taxes like a 25-year-old, school taxes, everything. What's it? Because I'm married. If we're not married, and we're not going to turn around and live together, cohabitate without being married. And and I realized that. That's why I contacted Senator Jones. I said, I think there's something the matter with the tax laws. I understand we went and bought, or somebody goes buy property in Florida or somewhere for a couple of years or whatever. I've been in my home for 26 years. She's been in hers 20-something years. Nothing's changed other than we fell in love. Our retirement's the same and everything, but we're being penalized for it. And I think, as stated in the bill, I think that probably a 10-year to show that people aren't just doing it to buy property and avoid paying taxes. If you've been there in that state for 10 years or more, that you should turn around and be able to let the code, if I wasn't married, apply to me there.
So she would have to have a homestead for 10 years, and
Yeah.
you would have to have a homestead for 10 years for this to apply, is that what y'all are saying?
I believe that's
That's
what I
correct.
understand.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, if you weren't married to her, and y'all were just, living together, what would happen to the taxes?
But then I wouldn't have to pay the taxes. I'm a 100% disabled veteran. So I have my taxes, and I just learned that. For 3 years, I been paying it until the lady at the tax office made me realize. She goes, "Whoa, you're paying too much." Wow, tax people telling me I'm paying too much. I said, yeah, one of your benefits of being a veteran and being disabled like that, you shouldn't be paying a property tax on.
All right. Senator Albers has a question here, our Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your service. It's extraordinary, to say the least. Curious, do you all file jointly? Or do you- separately? Okay.
We both filed ours separately.
Wondering if we can maybe make that a part of this in order to keep that. It makes a lot of sense if you're separate, right? You're filing taxes separate, and based on what you said, maybe that helps to alleviate some of that as well. Thank you.
Majority Leader Gooch.
Sure. I guess I'll ask the senator the question. If I understand correctly, if you're a Florida resident, you pay no income tax. So if my spouse wanted to earn a couple $1 million a year, I'd be happy with that. But if she wouldn't do that, I moved to Florida, buy a condo on the beach, we could file homestead exemption in Florida. Meanwhile, I live in North Georgia. 2 or 3 of my counties, homestead exemptions allow me to exempt 100% of school tax and partially or all of the local tax as well. So if I kept my homestead in my home in Lumpkin County, she and I could travel back and forth, live in Florida 6 months out of the year, not have to pay any income tax in Florida, other than that little here as a state senator. We would both get homestead exemption. We would pay little to no tax to the county, schools, or the city. And then we could lease out our homes through a VRBO. There's all kinds of ways I'm seeing us gaming the system here. Explain to me how you would prevent that from happening in that scenario.
Well, you wouldn't even qualify for any kind of homestead exemption unless you're of a certain age. I believe the first age where you get a portion of your taxes prorated is at age 62. I know I hit that wall. And then at 65 is where you would get the other benefit from your homestead exemption. So this is something that only applies to older Georgians. And if you, and again, what's in this bill is basically says you have to have had that homestead exemption for at least 10 years. So we narrowed it down where it really only fits older Georgians to prevent people from gaming the system. And this bill is certainly for our great state. I don't know what kind of reciprocity that Florida would have with Georgia, but what I'm seeking to do in our state is just let Georgia recognize the fact that you have two individuals that have had two separate lives, and then later on in their lives, they decide to get married, and simply because of that marriage penalty, one has lost the homestead exemption in their homes. So then they're paying taxes as if, as my good friend has said, they were 25 years old.
If I could follow up, could you point me where that age restriction is in this bill?
The age restriction is,
It's already in the code.
absolutely.
Okay, so this is only applying for 62. But even though, I mean, still, you would allow married couples at that age to be able to file exemptions in Georgia, even if they have that scenario that I just went over in Florida or some other state. Is that correct?
Well, they would first have to be a resident of Georgia to even qualify, and they would have to have been of a certain age in Georgia to qualify for the homestead exemption.
Yeah.
And they would have to live in their home in Georgia for at least 10 years.
Qualifications for residency in Georgia.
I'm not sure how long it would take someone to declare their residency. It wouldn't take long.
I think homestead exemption is one of those qualifications, is it not? If I may, what about qualifying to vote? Are you allowed to vote in each state that have homestead exemptions?
Well, I think voting is entirely different than what's proposed in this bill. This doesn't have anything.
You not have to certify that you're a resident of Georgia, and you have to have a certain address, and you have that homestead exemption to prove that you vote in that department. I'm just asking if that's a scenario, I'm just curious.
It's certainly not a scenario underneath this bill, because what this bill, the only thing that it does, it says for those older Georgians, if you will, and those who have gotten together later in their life and both have had homestead exemptions in different states. And remember, there's several states that border Georgia. I think we border Florida, Alabama. I lived in Columbus for a while. You can walk across the line and you're across the river and you're there in Alabama, not to mention the northern part of Georgia that borders Tennessee as well as South Carolina. So we are just one of those border states. And certainly there's a possibility where this would be applicable to other Georgians who's experienced the same thing as former Mayor Lee Stewart has.
All right, we've got several questions, actually about four more, so I think Senator Beach was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if a spouse lived here in Atlanta and the other spouse lived in Savannah and they bought houses in-state, not out-of-state, would they be able to get two homestead exemptions in the state?
Absolutely not, Senator.
So
This
it's
is
got to
only-
it's got to be in a different state.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Senator Eccles.
Just for a point of clarification, according to the Department of Revenue, a homestead exemption is eligible to any homeowner. There's no age requirement. I think you may be confusing the school tax exemption that the different counties implement on a county level. But for homestead exemption in the state of Georgia, you have to be the property owner, and that has to be your primary residence.
There's, underneath that code section, there's different levels of exemptions that's offered to homeowners. So I think you got to dig a little bit deeper to see which ones that we're referring to. What Mayor Stewart is referring to is the fact that he lost all of his exemptions for the school board. I know that occurs, starts at 62. I know I just got it. I became eligible, at least in Henry
Yeah,
County.
the school taxes are done on a county by county basis, so
That's correct.
that's determined by which county you live in. The state homestead exemption has state standards.
Yeah, some counties at a certain age give you 100% exemption on school taxes. Some don't. They don't give you anything, or they may give you 50,000, just depending. Senator Hodges.
question, just so that I can understand what we're talking about here. So in this instance, you've got a husband and a wife. The husband has owned a house in Georgia for 10 years at least. The wife has owned a house in Chicago for 10 years. The house in Georgia is owned by whom? Who's on the title? Just you.
Mhm.
So why would there be a homestead exemption problem if just you own the house? If you and your wife own the house and you went to file, I can see where somebody would say the wife has a house somewhere else, but if just you own the house and she doesn't,
I think it's defined in code as a married couple homestead exemption, is that not right?
but doesn't ownership have to?
No, it's simply because they're married.
I'm
That's
sorry?
what we, simply because they were married. That's the only reason. Had they not married, then
Regardless
they
of
both could've.
ownership.
That's correct.
All right, yeah, I think we're struggling with, we don't want to give somebody a financial advantage because they don't marry, but we also don't want to open a can of worms. Let's see what our vice chair has here. He might have something, we'll see.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very sympathetic to your situation, by the way. I am a little concerned about others who might take advantage of it. I'm wondering, and I was talking to legislative counsel, of two different potential approaches to this. One is, how do we add the fact that you are a disabled American veteran who served quite honorably and put yourself in harm for all of our freedom? And the second part is, this is also a local issue, right? I mean, because this is going to affect a county, a school system, potentially a city, right? And it's their standards, and as Senator Eccles was saying, right, each one of them sets their own rates. You know, as an example, you know, in some counties you're going to get that full exemption like you may get, and others you don't get, you know, that much at all. So I guess that's the question is, you know, how do we do this to tailor it to a local level and perhaps someone who has served this honorably? I just wonder if we can do a little more homework on that.
And thank you, Senator. In drafting this bill, I consulted with legislative counsel, and we asked about whether or not there was something we can do for someone that was disabled, honorably from the military. And unfortunately, we could not find any other way other than the homestead exemption for Henry County.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't know if the legislative council wants to weigh in on this at this time, or if you want to study it some more, or.
Probably be better to study it some more, but essentially, an applicant for.
Let me get you up on a mic so that the millions out there listening can hear you. What number are you at?
4.
Okay.
Waiting for this moment here, thank you. So an applicant for a homestead exemption is defined as a few different things: an individual who's unmarried, individual who's widowed, divorced individual, and then you have a married individual living with his or her spouse. So, you know, this person would not be, you know, considered an applicant to be able to apply for a homestead exemption. And then the definition of homestead requires it to be the actual permanent place of residence of an individual who is the applicant and which constitutes the home of the family. And then there's also provision in the event an individual who is the applicant owns 2 or more dwelling houses, he shall be allowed the exemption granted by law. Only one of the houses, only one homestead shall be allowed to one immediate family group. There's kind of a number of pieces here to kind of prevent people having more than one homestead, right?
Now, is that when you said 2 or more, is that talking about 2 or more in Georgia?
I think it's 2 or more anywhere, right? So essentially the option would be to change the homestead criteria for what constitutes a homestead and who can get one of these to provide for this situation, which is what this bill does. There is a disabled veteran homestead exemption that applies statewide. That's in the Constitution, and it's allowed to be kind of provided for by general law, and that's in a different code section. We could look at that as an option. It still kind of hinges on that definition of a homestead, though, and the homestead being kind of the marital dwelling place. So it's a bit of a unique situation.
All right.
And
Well,
those are the exact questions that we discussed with the draft of this legislation. And this was the only way that they decided that it could move forward in legislative council.
Senator Estevez,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just
stay up there.
based on my reading, what you just said, I'm not sure with these changes that he would still qualify as an applicant.
Right, that might need to be added in there
Yeah.
as well.
So I think there's an additional provision that needs to be added to make that happen, which could complicate things. Because it would be, right now, the only married person that would be considered an applicant is someone living with his or her spouse.
Right.
You would have to add a definition to say an applicant could be a married individual, I guess not living with his or her spouse. But that could potentially open the applicant pool up, which means you need a further definition, which could go to your point. But just wanted to point out that that's missing. You want to make sure that that gets added.
Like I said, I'm not sure I understand that distinction. Can you say it one more time, please?
So right now, the only married person that can be an applicant for a homestead exemption is someone living with his or her spouse. Based on my understanding of what's happening,
That's correct.
the mayor is not living full-time with his spouse.
They are living full-time
Okay. Then,
in Georgia. They live in Georgia, but she still continues to own her residence up in Illinois.
and that calls a different question.
So is that house lived in, or?
Henry County gave, and if I can just clarify a little bit the remarks that the mayor made, Henry County gave him a choice. They said you cannot have two homestead exemptions. So he had to choose between his wife's homestead exemption in Illinois, or he had to choose between his homestead exemption here in Henry County. So they made the decision to choose between her homestead exemption up in Illinois. So he's been disqualified from being able to qualify for the homestead exemption here in Georgia. But this legislation, and the only reason why he was disqualified was because he had gotten married. He's had homestead exemption on his property here in Georgia for well over 10 years. So the mayor said he's,
I guess I do have a question, and I don't mean to be personal on this, but if
Sure.
your wife lives with you here in Georgia, then who's in the house in Chicago?
When we decided to get married, we're not gonna her kids are there, mine were here. She's got doctors and that, we go back and forth between, she goes more than, when it's cold, I'm not going there. When it's warm, I stay down here. But we go back and forth, and then when I was a contractor in Iraq, she'd maintain both houses for me, cause somebody's gotta take care of them, so she'd come down, spend a couple weeks here, a couple weeks in Chicago, back and forth.
Okay, I think that the law was intended to be the primary residence. It sounds like your primary residence is actually Georgia, though.
Mine is, yes. And she votes, driver's license, everything in Illinois. Mine is in Georgia.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're gonna look at this further. You know, I think we wanna make sure we don't have unintended consequences, obviously, on this. I certainly don't want to advise you to get a divorce. That's not what I want to come out of this committee and tell you. Yeah, they are. So give us a little bit more time, and we'll work together and see what we can come up with. If there's language we can do that will make this work, is that okay?
absolutely.
You guys. All right. Well,
Thank
thanks
you,
for
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thanks for coming to the meeting. Thank you for your service.
Thank
This
you for
meeting's
your time.
adjourned.